A quiet courtroom, a cold morning, and a girl who walked in holding a folded ticket that seemed heavier than its paper weight. No one in the room expected what would happen next, least of all Judge Caprio. For years he'd listened to excuses, anger, and regret. But this time something felt different. The girl wasn't arguing. She wasn't begging. She simply looked up at him with eyes that carried both fear and honesty. When she spoke, her voice trembled, but her words didn't seek pity. They carried something far more powerful, sincerity. And in that moment, everyone forgot they were in a courtroom. They were witnessing compassion meet innocence. As the story unfolded, you could almost feel the walls of authority melt away. This wasn't about a fine anymore, it was about humanity. It was about how one simple gesture could remind even a judge that justice isn't only written in laws, it's written in the heart. When Judge Caprio leaned forward, the entire courtroom leaned with him, waiting to see how a lifetime of experience would answer a single act of truth. That's when everything changed. What began as a simple case became a lesson the world would never forget. Millions later watched the footage, replaying that moment again and again, not because of the fine but because of the feeling. A reminder that kindness doesn't need a courtroom, it just needs courage. Before we dive deeper into what really happened that day, pause for a second. If stories like this move you, if they make you believe that empathy still has a place in justice, subscribe to our channel Real Judge Stories, and let us know in the comments what compassion means to you. Your words might inspire the next act of kindness that changes everything. Before that remarkable moment ever took place, Judge Frank Caprio had already become a quiet legend in the world of justice. For decades he served as the chief municipal judge in Providence, Rhode Island, a man known not just for his rulings, but for his rare balance of compassion and law. His courtroom wasn't a place of fear, it was a place of fairness. People didn't just walk out with verdicts, they walked out with hope. Born to Italian immigrant parents, Caprio grew up understanding what it meant to struggle, to be heard, and to be given a second chance. Those roots shaped every decision he made behind the bench. Over the years he earned a reputation as the people's judge, not because he went easy on the law, but because he understood the human stories behind it. By the time this young girl entered his courtroom, millions had already seen clips of him listening, smiling, and showing empathy where others might show indifference. But this case, this one moment, would capture something even deeper. It would reveal that kindness, when guided by wisdom, doesn't weaken justice. It defines it. It was an ordinary morning in Providence Municipal Court. Papers shuffled, chairs creaked, and the low murmur of waiting voices filled the room. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, glancing at the next case file. A parking violation, small, routine, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the courtroom door opened, silence followed. A young girl, no more than 13, stepped in beside her father. Her hands clutched a white envelope, edges slightly crumpled from the pressure of nervous fingers. Behind the bench, Judge Caprio smiled softly. "Good morning," he said in that warm tone that made even the most anxious visitors feel seen. The father nodded respectfully. "Morning, Your Honor," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of worry. The girl glanced toward him, then back at the judge. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, yet filled with quiet courage. Ms. Harris, the courtroom clerk, began to read the charge, an unpaid parking ticket, issued when the father's car was found in a no-parking zone outside a local school. The fine wasn't huge, but for a struggling family, it was enough to sting. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. "Who's the young lady with you?" he asked. "This is my daughter Emma," the man replied. "She wanted to come with me today." The judge smiled at her. "Well, Emma, are you here to help your dad or defend him?" The courtroom chuckled softly. Emma looked down for a second, then lifted her head. "Maybe both, sir," she said quietly. That answer, innocent and pure, drew a grin from Caprio. He'd seen hundreds of cases, excuses, anger, even tears, but this was different. There was no defense being rehearsed here, only honesty. No one in that room knew it yet, but this small exchange would set the stage for one of the most unforgettable moments in his courtroom. A moment that would remind millions around the world that empathy, even in its simplest form, can rewrite what justice looks like. Judge Caprio turned the page in the case file, his tone gentle but precise. "It says here the vehicle was parked in a no-parking zone near Lincoln Elementary," he began. "Do you remember why that happened, sir?" The father nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the desk before him. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I was dropping Emma off. It was raining hard that morning and the lot was full. I thought I'd only be a minute." Caprio's voice remained calm. "And that 1 minute cost you a $50 ticket." He smiled lightly, but the kindness in his eyes softened the remark. I understand. We've all been there. The father exhaled, shoulders tense. I tried to pay it, sir, but things have been tight. I'm between jobs right now. For a moment, silence filled the courtroom. Caprio nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Then, turning toward Emma, he asked, So, young lady, how did you feel when your dad got this ticket? Emma looked up, her small voice carrying across the room. I felt bad, she said. He was just trying to help me. It wasn't his fault. Caprio leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You sound like a wonderful daughter. Emma hesitated, then added softly, I told him I'd give him my lunch money to help pay it. The courtroom grew still. Even Miss Harris, the clerk, paused mid-note. The judge blinked, surprised by the purity in her offer. Your lunch money? He repeated gently. Emma nodded. Yes, sir. I save it sometimes. I wanted to help. That single sentence carried more weight than any legal argument. The father turned toward his daughter, eyes glistening, caught between pride and heartbreak. Judge Caprio smiled faintly, his voice lowering. You know, Emma, I think you just made this case a lot more complicated, in a very good way. There was laughter, but it was tender, filled with warmth. The atmosphere had shifted. This was no longer about a parking ticket or a fine. It had become a story about love, sacrifice, and the quiet courage of a child willing to give what little she had for someone she loved. Judge Caprio paused for a moment, resting his pen on the desk. The silence felt almost sacred, like the entire courtroom was holding its breath. He looked at Emma, studying the sincerity in her eyes. Then, softly, he said, Emma, that's one of the kindest things I've ever heard in this courtroom. She shifted nervously, unsure if she'd done something wrong or right. Her father reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of love and reassurance. Judge Caprio leaned forward again. You know, he continued, people come in here every day with excuses. Some tell long stories, others blame someone else. But what you just did, that's something special. He turned toward Miss Harris, the clerk. Do we have a record of that $50 fine? Yes, Your Honor, she replied, flipping through the logbook. Judge Caprio smiled, tapping the desk lightly. All right, let's see if we can work something out here. Then, addressing Emma once more, he asked, How much lunch money do you save each day? Emma thought for a moment. Maybe $2, sometimes $3. The judge nodded. $2 or $3 a day, he repeated softly. That's not much, but it's everything when it comes from the heart. Then, with that warm, wise tone the world had come to love, he said, Here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to take your lunch money, Emma. In fact, I'm going to use your kindness as payment in full. Your dad's fine is dismissed. The courtroom broke into quiet applause. The father covered his face, overcome with emotion. Emma looked confused at first, then smiled, the kind of smile that lights up a room without trying. Judge Caprio leaned back, hands folded. You reminded us all today, he said gently, that doing the right thing doesn't always mean following the strictest rule. Sometimes it means following your heart. That moment, simple, unscripted, and pure, would soon circle the globe. The cameras caught every detail, the trembling lip of a father who couldn't speak, the soft nod of a judge who just turned a courtroom into a classroom for humanity, and the courage of a child whose small gesture changed everything. For a few long seconds, Judge Caprio said nothing. He simply looked at the father and daughter before him, the reality of their situation written clearly across their faces. Then he leaned forward slightly, his tone soft but resolute. You know, he began, I've been on this bench for a long time. I've heard just about every story you could imagine. But I don't think I've ever seen a better lawyer than your daughter. The courtroom chuckled, but behind the humor was deep respect. Caprio continued, Emma didn't argue the law, she spoke the truth. And sometimes the truth is all justice really needs. He looked directly at the father. You should be proud of her. The way she stood up for you, that's love, that's loyalty. The world could use a lot more of that. The father nodded silently, his voice breaking. Thank you, Your Honor. We're both grateful. Caprio smiled. No need to thank me. You've both already paid the fine, just not in dollars. You paid it in something much more valuable, kindness. A soft wave of emotion swept through the room. Even the officers standing near the back seemed moved. The judge turned slightly toward the camera crew that often filmed his sessions. If people watching this learn one thing, he said, let it be that mercy and justice aren't opposites. They're partners. He gave his final nod, marking the case closed. The gavel came down softly, more a gesture of completion than authority. As the father and daughter began to leave, Caprio added with a smile, "Emma, make sure you eat your lunch today. That's a direct order from the court." Laughter filled the room once again, but this time it carried something else too, a warmth that lingered long after the sound faded. When the footage of that hearing was later shared online, millions of viewers found themselves pausing mid-scroll, captivated by the humanity in a courtroom once thought to be defined only by rules and regulations. What the world saw that day wasn't merely a case dismissed, it was a glimpse of what justice could look like when touched by compassion. In a time when authority often feels distant and rigid, Judge Caprio reminded everyone that empathy isn't weakness, it's wisdom. His decision wasn't about setting a precedent in law, it was about setting a standard in humanity. The moment the words "fine dismissed" left his lips, something profound happened. People didn't see a judge and a defendant, they saw a father, a daughter, and a man who understood that fairness and forgiveness could coexist. Across continents, the clip sparked conversations about moral courage, compassion in leadership, and the small acts that restore faith in others. Teachers played it in classrooms, parents shared it at dinner tables, and countless viewers wrote comments that echoed a single sentiment: this is what the world needs more of. That single act, a child's innocent gesture, a judge's thoughtful choice, became a timeless reminder that sometimes the greatest impact doesn't come from punishment or power, but from listening with the heart. Long before that emotional morning, Judge Caprio had already built his legacy on something far deeper than legal rulings: empathy. He often said that every person standing before him had a story, and his duty wasn't merely to enforce the law, but to understand the person behind the violation. "You can't measure justice," he once explained, "without measuring mercy." That belief wasn't born in the courtroom. It came from his childhood in a small neighborhood of Providence, where his father worked long hours as a fruit peddler and his mother devoted her days to caring for their large family. They didn't have much, but they had values: respect, kindness, and fairness. These were the principles Caprio carried with him from his home to the bench. Over the years, he gained national attention for turning moments of judgment into moments of humanity. Whether it was forgiving a struggling parent's fine or showing understanding toward an elderly driver, his approach made people feel seen, not condemned. He wasn't lenient out of sympathy, he was fair out of understanding. To Judge Caprio, the law was never just about punishment, it was about purpose. His courtroom became a reflection of his life philosophy: everyone deserves to be heard before they are judged. And through every smile, every pause, and every word of patience, he redefined what justice could mean in the modern world: not cold, not distant, but deeply human. Within days of being uploaded, the video of Judge Caprio and the young girl spread like wildfire. What began as a quiet courtroom exchange transformed into a global conversation about empathy and justice. Comments poured in from every corner of the world, people from different languages, religions, and backgrounds united by a single feeling: hope. "Faith in humanity restored," wrote one viewer. Another said, "If every judge were like him, our world would look completely different." News outlets picked it up, calling it the verdict that melted the internet. Teachers used it as an example of moral courage. Parents showed it to their children, reminding them that kindness is a strength, not a weakness. The clip transcended borders. In schools, offices, and homes, people replayed the moment where a judge smiled instead of scolded, and where a child's sincerity outweighed a legal penalty. That small act, an offer of lunch money, became a symbol of innocence powerful enough to soften authority. Even months later, comments continued to flood in. People didn't just remember the case, they remembered the feeling. They saw that compassion could be contagious, that one act of grace could ripple across millions of hearts. Judge Caprio's courtroom had become more than a place of law. It had become a place where the world rediscovered its humanity. Years have passed since that day, yet the echo of Judge Caprio's decision continues to ripple through hearts and headlines alike. In a world often driven by quick judgments and cold regulations, that one act of compassion stands as a quiet rebellion, a reminder that fairness doesn't always come from following the rulebook word for word, but from understanding the story behind it. The beauty of that moment wasn't only that a fine was dismissed, it was that a lesson was delivered, one far greater than any courtroom could contain. A child reminded the world that empathy still lives in simple gestures, and a judge proved that authority and kindness can share the same bench. Together they created a moment that outlived its verdict. When people watch that clip today, they don't just see a case, they see a reflection of what we all hope to find: humanity in power, humility in judgment, and love in places we least expect it. So, the next time you're faced with a decision, big or small, remember this story. Sometimes justice is found not in the laws we enforce, but in the hearts we choose to listen to. If stories like this touch your heart, remind you of hope, or make you believe in compassion again, subscribe to our channel Real Judge Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because kindness grows stronger every time it's told.